What are your thoughts on rent control?
I think that rent control to some extent has been really important, but I do think it kind of it creates this perverse market to some extent as well, because if you have a rent controlled unit, you're not going to want to leave it, right? And I think that it limits your opportunities. Like if you're more willing to move around and chase a job that's going to give you better benefits and better pay, I think that's a better situation. At the same time, though, in a state like Florida that has no rent control at all and like very few protections for tenants, you see your rent go up out of nowhere to the tune of like $500, $800. I have family in Florida, and my cousin actually just experienced that. And she loved her apartment, had no issues, like, paying on time, had a good relationship with her landlord. But as soon as COVID was over, they raised her rent by $500, and she was expecting a baby. And so she had no choice but to leave. And being forced to leave your home, right, whether you're renting it or whatever, it's very difficult. So I think that there should be some regulations in place that apply to all rental units, not just like a certain slice of rental units, while it doesn't apply to others. But I honestly, I don't know, and I'm not an expert on it, and I need to read into it a little more, because I see the downsides, but I also see the benefits.
Yeah, from my perspective, it just rewards people who have been in the unit for a very long time, and it's not based on income.
Yeah,
I've seen some people make $200,000 a year, and they got lucky because they rented the right place in 1994 in Santa Monica by the beach. Their rent's $800 a month, and no one could kick them out.
Right.
The market rent could be
$5,000
$5,000 a month. They never want to leave. So what ends up happening is that everyone who's rent controlled tends to want to stay there because they got a good deal, regardless of how much money they make.
And that limits the inventory of rental units. And so those that are not rent controlled, you see the prices go up and it gets inflated.
Yeah. But the other issue that I see is that landlords with rent controlled units really don't have any incentive to fix it up because they almost want the tenants to leave. They'll do the bare minimum just so that the tenants could kind of like skirt, because why invest more money when you're not going to get a higher return? So there's an area in West Adams, where one street is rent controlled because all the buildings are pre-1928 or whenever it was, and they're all older, multifamily. And then another street is not rent controlled. Same year built, but they're single family homes. And you see a stark difference between the two in terms of upkeep, the area, cleanliness. I mean, it's wild that these landlords on the one side do not put any money in the property whatsoever.
Yeah.
And just seeing that stark difference between the two. I'm not saying that's 100% rent control, but when you have tenants in there, sometimes you can't afford to pay more if you buy the building on a certain cap rate and you're just earning enough to pay the mortgage and like the bare minimum. You don't really have anything extra to fix up the building with.
Yeah, that's a good point too. And I've certainly, I've seen stories of landlords that not only refuse to improve their buildings and maintain it well, but in some cases, and this is extreme, they'll like try to get their tenants to move out by like releasing rats into the unit. Have you seen those stories?
The New York ones are crazy. There's one where like one tenant held out from the entire building. So what they did, they renovated the entire building, and she was on like one of the top floors, and they made the elevator inaccessible.
Oh,
because it was constantly under construction because they wanted her to move.
No, see, like that kind of stuff is not right.
In fairness, they offered her hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And she didn't take it?
And she didn't take it.
That's crazy.
She didn't take it.
Wild.
She wanted to prove a point that she wasn't going to get kicked out. Now, she had been there for a long time, but they offered her a lot of money to leave.
Yeah.
But they're saying, well, I'm in my legal right to renovate the unit, and you don't have a legal right to an elevator, so you have to walk up and down the stairs.
That's
it's
crazy.
Wild.
That is wild.
But you hear crazy stories. A lot of them are New York because you're dealing with such immense wealth. And some people who have been there since like the 1960s or 70s who have lived in the same unit their entire life.
So it's been a while since I've thought about or talked about rent control.
Yeah.
So I'm now recalling some of the things that I've read that I think are interesting in this topic. So one of the other downsides to rent control that I think we've experienced firsthand in Los Angeles is if you are a landlord, a mom and pop landlord for a rent controlled building in LA, and you're approached by a developer who's like, look, I'll give you definitely more than what the building is worth, because they want to buy the building. And what do they want to do? They want to demolish it.
Of course.
And they want to build a completely new building where the units will not be rent controlled. They get to rent them at market rate. And so that ends up actually decreasing, rent controlled units, because it's very tempting. I mean, if you're a landlord, you've been schlepping around, like maintaining this building, you really do feel like your margins are like very low, and you are fighting by the way, being a landlord, I can't think of a worse job. Like, I can't believe, like, do you enjoy it? It's so awful.
Listen, I enjoyed it a lot more when I first got into it because I was really involved. I was working full-time as a real estate agent. I would look every day at properties. I'd go and see them. I'd be very hands-on. Like, I did some of the work myself. I'd be in there like painting myself. I tried to do anything.
I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
like, I'm very handy.
I loved it.
Yeah.
Now that I moved, I have a property manager. So I try to be a little more hands-off. But in the beginning, it was something I took so much pride in. I would be posting on Instagram, like, what do you think of this fixture? And I'd do the polls. And if one got more votes than the other, I'd buy that one. And
I told my dad, like, because my dad's very old school. And so he's like, I want to leave something for my kids, before I die. And he thinks, like, we're looking forward to inheriting an apartment building. I am not. And I looked him in the eye and I was like, I will sell it.
Well,
because
you also get a
stepped
stepped-up tax basis now. Did you see that? The new tax.
No, tell me about it.
There's a property tax thing that went into effect. I had no idea. Now, I voted in favor of this, believe it or not. The whole thing was that it was to keep the same property tax for people who have lost their homes to fire or damage or earthquake. And it makes sense. Imagine you lose your home to a fire. You have to rebuild. You don't want your property tax being reassessed.
That's true.
Because you built a new home. Because your house burned down, because of an earthquake. And I was like, this is really great. And I voted for it. And I didn't realize there's all these provisions in that in order to do that, you give up the stepped up property tax basis for kids who inherit the properties from their parents. In order to get the stepped up tax basis, you have to live there full time as your full-time residence. Rental properties are exempt. And there's all these limitations in terms of what you can transfer from a parent to a child. And that was never in place before.